Hello, BookTube. It's a gentle, beautiful October day here, but Harold Bloom is dead. And that has been working on me all morning, and it made me want to get up and go out and surround myself with books. Uh, and a friend of mine runs a church here in Boston, and he is getting ready for his next charity sale, and he has a million books, a million more books than he's ever going to sell. When he's in that situation, or when he's just had a sale, he often asks me to come over, and he says, "Take whatever you like." I do some favors for his church, and he seems to think that I require recompense. I do not require recompense, but I'm not gonna turn down somebody who's asking me to look over books. So that plus the proximity of those boxes and boxes of books to the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston tempted me to an errand, to an outing. I don't often do that anymore. I have lots and lots of books coming to the door, and outings mean I don't bring Frida with me, and I kind of miss her when I'm not around her, so I don't do it as often as I used to. But I went out and I accumulated a pile of books and thought about Harold Bloom the whole time, and how bookish a person he was, how undilutedly bookish a person he was. So I wanted to show them to you, and we'll just wander through them a bit, because that's what I do with my BookTube channel. The first two, we can start at the Brattle. The first two books I got at the Brattle were occasioned by another book. They were occasioned by a book that I got in the mail. This thing, the new Everyman's Library edition of the collected stories of Elizabeth Bowen. This has a John Banville introduction that's actually quite good, and it's a standard thing. I mean, Everyman has done this collection of her short stories many times. The introduction is new, and this is, I believe, a new look to the thing. I am an enormous Elizabeth Bowen fan. On this channel, I think I've shown her nonfiction book about Bowen Court, about her family's home. But I love her fiction. And Banville makes some very knowing, some very intelligent comments about her novels while he's introducing her short stories. And then at the Brattle, I found two of those novels, both Penguins. So there's The Heat of the Day, and there's the Death of the Heart. Two slim Elizabeth Bowen novels. Probably whoever unloaded these probably unloaded a couple more. I didn't see any at the Brattle, but I don't know if I go back. I don't picture myself going back anytime too soon. Once upon a time, when my old dogs, when my girls were sick and dying, when they'd reached the point where they weren't really noticing me all that much and mostly slept all day, the mental strain of taking care of them, of cleaning up after them, of constantly being there all night long to ease their fears as much as I could, that had me leaving the house almost every day to do some errand of some kind or other. I would settle them down, and then I would leave just to recharge my own mental batteries. That's not true anymore, not by a long shot. So I don't know. Ordinarily, the Brattle sale carts outside are just a big, wonderful mixture of everything. And usually, if someone has sold, for instance, two of the same thing, I'm sure that these came from the same person, usually they've sold them all. And I think there are two others in these Penguin Greenspine trade paperbacks, but two is enough. I'll gladly take more Elizabeth Bowen fiction or nonfiction. I think I got rid of the Bowen Court book to one of you, but as it is, I couldn't help but view it as serendipity, because I'm going to be writing about this thing, and I'm already deeply rereading a lot of the stories, and that's automatically making me curious to refresh my memory about the differences between her registers and the things she tries and does in the short stories and in the novels. So I'm glad I have two of those. And then the other thing that I got at the Brattle is an example of what we talk about often here on BookTube, which is to what extent or whenever can you give an example of your book buying being influenced by BookTube. And this is a case of that. This is the book that Jason Harrigan over at his channel, Byways in Bookland, has been banging on about endlessly. Actually, I think he's only mentioned it a couple of times, but I read this book when it first came out, and I liked it, and I had totally forgotten how much I liked it, how good it is. This is by Francis Stoner Saunders, and it is The Devil's Broker, and it's about Renaissance Italy and Renaissance Southern Europe, but it's really about John Hawksmoor, who was a son of minor gentry in England. His people, his father, was a free tenant and a sort of a lower social rung dog's body associate and #1 cheerleader for the Earls of Oxford in Essex. And Hawksmoor became a condottiere. He became a soldier for hire, a mercenary in Italy mostly, willing to, sick his army on the enemies of anyone who paid him in good gold or who made good promises. And I had forgotten how entertainingly this book is written. It is terrific, a terrific book to have on the whole period. The only problem that I have with it is that it is way too generous to Hawkswood himself. It's way too generous to condottieri, to soldiers for hire. They were the scum of the earth, and Hawkwood himself never had a contract that he didn't break. He was treachery embodied. And there's a longer story that I could get into. It's an extremely detailed story of the mission that a young 29 or 30-year-old Geoffrey Chaucer was sent on in 1327. He was sent on a mission from King Edward to Genoa to arrange all kinds of things, including Genoese port, to smooth facilitations for Genoese men-at-arms in English causes. It was a big sort of pig's breakfast of a diplomatic mission. And Chaucer was, in 1327, he was fairly well known at court. It was well known to be smart. He was well known to have his wits about him in such missions. But even so, going overland in winter from England to Genoa is no small thing. It was no small thing. He had to cross the Alps, and he had a very small but very capable armed escort with him, just a few people and a bunch of dogs. He encountered, when he managed to cross the Alps, a horrifying endeavor. Horrifying. Don't be fooled by the end of The Sound of Music. Crossing the Alps in any weather is not easy. Crossing the Alps in winter in the 14th century, you could easily die. The monks that were stationed along the way routinely hauled dead bodies out of the snow and ice. Once Chaucer got to the sunnier slopes of Italy, once he started making, crossed the Alps and started making his passage to Genoa, all he heard about from every single person, every passerby, every person on the road, and at every inn, was all about Hawkswood. It was all about this charismatic guy. Acuto was what the Italians gave him, the sort of the easy nickname of Acuto. And this book captures those personalities and the vagaries of that time just fantastically. I was reading it all the way back here and remembering. So in this case, I'm not even upset with Jason. In this case, not only was it booktube peer pressure, but I'm glad that it was. It reminded me of a book that I have loved, and I was very glad. I will be glad to add this to my history collection instead of just reread it and get rid of it. Like, for instance, the Elizabeth Bowen novels. I will reread, I will ponder them, but I will probably get rid of them once I'm done. They were free, basically. And once I'm done with them and I have used them, I have mulched them into the review of the collected short stories, I probably won't keep them. So anyway, that was the Battle. And then there was my friend's sale. And the minute I got there, I realized what I was looking at. He has donations, you know how charity and church sales are. You get donations from everybody around you, and if donations come from one person, the donations from one person will often reflect that person, whether it's somebody clearing out a dead relative's attic or someone saying, I have looking at these books for 50 years, I don't need them anymore. One way or another, I knew immediately when I saw the first 6 or 7 boxes of these things that it was science fiction. Hardcover science fiction. An endless number of hardcover science fiction volumes. Some old, some very old, some fairly new, all in fairly good condition, although they're all just, those of you who love this sort of thing, oh my God, they breathe that old book smell, that combination of attic, love, and a very slight amount of mold. They just breathe that. I wish there were a way to convey it through the camera, because this is just at the point where that smell is beautiful. And I got a bunch of them. I went out in the beginning of the day. I should never do this, but at the beginning of the day, when I was heading out, I said, well, the one thing you shouldn't get is any kind of fiction. Stick to biography and history, but don't bother with any kind of fiction. And most of the stuff I got was fiction, and this is all science fiction and fantasy. So I wanted to show it to you. There's a hardcover of the Roger Zelazny the late Zelazny novel Changeling, which is a little bit flyweight, if I remember correctly, but I will gladly reread it to find out. The main reason I got it is because it's profusely illustrated. And I've had this many times. This, I think, is a science fiction book club original. I bet a lot of these things are. Zelazny is on my mind because he is in that 2-volume Library of America box set of classic science fiction of the 1960s. One of his books is in there. And it feels a little new because the edition that's in that box set has been fixed. It's not the edition of the book This Immortal that I read. It's been editorially curated in a way that I've never encountered before. So it'll be like reading a new Zelazny in a way. We're going to continue. But that might be the day's mail. We're going to continue, though. This next one is definitely Science Fiction Book Club. And it's Frank Frazetta on the cover. A couple of you science fiction and fantasy fans are going to be nodding like that. These are the Mars novels of Edgar Rice Burroughs. Frank Frazetta did they used the cover for collected volumes of these Mars novels, and they used Frank Frazetta illustrations. And this is Thuvia, Maid of Mars, and the Chessmen of Mars, two fantastic Barsoom adventures that don't have much to do with John Carter. They're just fantastic. That is the cover. There is John Carter and Dejah Thoris. There he is fighting. He is prepared to face a Martian animal. What you can't make out here is that there are many legs. But look at that. That is just gorgeous. Oh my. This was the only one I saw. And it might be, I think, the only one I don't have. I have a lot of these others. These are my favorite science fiction book club things to get. I think this is late enough in the series so that there aren't spot illustrations. Yeah, it doesn't look like there are spot illustrations. The first volume has, I think, black and white spot illustrations, also by Frazetta, whose imaginations, his imagings of the Barsoom world is just incredible. So I had to get it, especially since these were all free. I just put them in a bag and took them away. The next one is a science fiction classic. I don't know if it's currently got a reprint. It might not be in print. Frida, what are you doing? Calm down, baby girl. But this is a classic. Frida, cut it out. What's the matter with you? I don't know what's going on out in the front of the house. I have no idea, but it's got Frida up in arms. Probably involves a dog. I'm going to continue with this no matter how many interruptions I get, because I'm going to finish. This is a classic on a list of the best science fiction 100 best science fiction novels. It would have to have its place. This is Joan Vinge's The Snow Queen. And this is the hardcover. This is probably, well, it says Dial Press, but I could swear that this size made it a book club edition. But anyway, this is about a world that experiences incredibly long seasons, and it has a tyrant queen. And it's just, I haven't reread this in I don't know how long. So this was not just nostalgia. I'm greatly looking forward to reading it again. A lot of these things. Like this next one, this is Glenn Larson, the mastermind behind Battlestar Galactica back in the 70s, and the mastermind in part behind the great revamp of Battlestar Galactica in the aughts. And this is his book, Battlestar Galactica. And this has got to be a book club edition, because that's all that it is. And the thing that I've been trying to make this case for 50 years now. The thing that people, when I say this is actually a very good science fiction novel, people never believe me, because Battlestar Galactica has you know, the 70s Battlestar Galactica has such a name for kitsch. I think that is unwarranted. Frank Frazetta also did add photos or add illustrations for Battlestar Galactica. He did one poster at least that I know of. This cover is not by him, but he did one cover at least that I know of, and some very nice artwork for TV Guide back when that paid a lot of money. You could easily do maybe not easily, maybe it isn't possible, I don't know who owns the rights, but you could easily do the first two Battlestar Galactica novels, this one and the one that came right after it about an ice planet, are actually well done. They're actually very good, enjoyable science fiction novels. You could easily bring those together with the Frazetta artwork that is all about. The Frazetta art is clearly depicting elements of Glenn Larson's Battlestar Galactica. You could make a nice volume. But one way or another, I have been championing this book to people and saying it's actually a very solid science fiction novel. And the reason why they don't believe me is because they associate the original Battlestar Galactica with kitsch, with this kind of embarrassing 70s hairdos or whatnot. And the response that I always have to that is that the original Battlestar Galactica was quite good. There are many episodes, 6 probably episodes of that original very short run of the series that are quite good. So this is not all that odd that I would like it so much. Then there's these has got to be science fiction book club editions, no matter what they say on the spine. This is the best of Frederick Pohl. And this cover illustration is clearly Vincent Tafati, but the information on the inside says that the cover painting is by John Berkey, and I'm wondering now if John Berkey was a pen name of Vincent Tafati earlier in his career or whatever. But this is a collection of Fred Pohl's. He wrote science fiction short stories and novels all the time. It's got an introduction by Lester Del Rey, and Lester Del Rey, bless his heart, gives Fred Pohl way too much credit. He gives him credit for way too much literary ability. But some of these stories are quite enjoyable. And I haven't read this book. The Best of Fred Pohl has been in and out of print many times. It's had paperback editions and whatnot. I haven't read it in forever. I haven't read any Fred Pohl in forever, so I'll gladly give it a try. Then this next one, I might not have picked up if I weren't kind of, sort of, guilty pleasure in love with the adaptation on Netflix. but since I am, I got Terry Brooks's first book, The Sword of Shannara, it has a Hildebrandt Brothers illustration on the cover there, which is no small shakes. But it also has full-color Hildebrandt illustrations inside the book itself. It is, as you can see, in parts, an intense Tolkien ripoff. But nevertheless, it has these color illustrations, but if I remember correctly, this originally, it also has black and white illustrations, also by the Hildebrandt brothers. And I like the adaptation. I'm perfectly willing to admit that. It is cheese, but it is just my kind of cheese. And John Rhys Davies seems to be having a ball in the first and second seasons. But I haven't read the book since it first came out. This is 1980s, right? This is 1977. I haven't read this since then. So even though I have been mildly tempted by the adaptation has made me think a number of times, the next time you see a really cheap version of The Sword of Shannara, you should read it. And lo and behold, this was not only really cheap, but free. And it's a dust jacket still in perfect condition, like the day that it was sold. So I grabbed it. Then these next two, serendipity, pure serendipity, might not keep them, but we are doing a read-along on this channel of the Thomas Covenant novels of Stephen R. Donaldson, and we are now in the second trilogy. And the first book of the second trilogy, The Wounded Land, to me has always seemed very parallel to the first book in the first trilogy, Lord Foulsbane. It has seemed to me in both trilogies, no matter how many times I reread them, that the first book in both trilogies is very much the weakest book. The Wounded Land is all misery and torture and heat and bugs and poison until the very last act, when suddenly Donaldson seems to remember that all of that might be really good in a Dostoevskian type dystopian way, but in a book you need somebody to root for. You need something to care about, some heroism involved, other than Thomas Covenant, which is a pretty sorry hero. And we're doing a read-along of The Wounded Land right now on this channel, and I'm remembering more and more the more I reread the book for the read-along. And that has made me think that if I remember correctly, I might end up loving Book 2 and Book 3 of this second trilogy much more than I ever have, now that I'll be reading it much more closely. And lo and behold, I found them both in hardcover. The One Tree and White Gold Wielder. Book 2 and Book 3 in the Second Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. So there you go. I have mass market paperbacks, but that I got from Amazon. But they're not holding up particularly well. Now I don't need to worry about it. I can just reinforce the paperback covers on these, and they'll do just fine. And they'll do for keeping too. If it turns out that I end up really liking them more than I thought I would, I'll be able to keep them. Just put them on the shelf, along with the second 2 volumes of the first trilogy, which are also things that I keep because I love them so much. And then this last one, talk about, I mentioned The Snow Queen belongs on any list of science fiction classics, even though no one remembers it and no one reads it, and you won't see it in your science fiction aisle of your Barnes & Noble. If that's true for Joan Vinge, it's 10 times more true for this author who never wrote a bad book. And I found his masterpiece, and I'm going to delight. I haven't read this book in 30 years. I'm going to delight in reading it again, even though it's going to be a little irritating because science fiction fans, young science fiction fans, have no idea that this guy even exists. This is John Brunner, and this is Stand on Zanzibar. I would say, his greatest book. No more easy to digest now, I would bet, than it was when it first came out. It's a head scratcher of a book. It's brilliant, but it's discordant. It's a polyphony of voices, and it's also prescient in a lot of ways. Not just supercomputers and AI, but also the internet and the proliferation of institutionalized decadence in Western societies. And this has got to be. I mean, I'm kind of sort of quietly appealing to all you science fiction fans, Mark Richardson or Jason Harrigan himself. I'm sort of appealing to you to wonder, are these science fiction book club editions? I can't help but think it is. I don't remember what this looked like when it first came out in hardcover. I think I was out of the country when this first came out. This is a 1970s book, I believe. 1968. So I don't remember this at all, this edition at all. Those are people on the cover. But I was overjoyed to find it. Fantastic. It was just a whole. I could easily have come out with 10 times as much science fiction. There was a whole bunch of things that I had to be choosy because I didn't have anybody carrying my books for me. So we got Stand on Zanzibar. How's that? John Brunner. Then 2 Stephen Donaldson books, The One Tree and The White Gold Wielder. Then The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks, which will almost certainly be terrible. I remember it being awful, but I'm willing to give it another try since the show is pleasing me. Then The Best of Frederick Pohl, in a science fiction book club edition, I'm pretty sure. Battlestar Galactica, Glenn Larson's first book about his treasured creation. The Snow Queen by Joan Vinge, which had sequels, but this is the one I remember. Thuvia, Maid of Mars, and The Chessmen of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, with these great book club Frank Frazetta covers. Changeling by Roger Zelazny, I think even his fans would admit, not one of his great books, but it will still be a lot of fun to read. It's not Chronicles of Amber. I wish that I had seen the Amber Chronicles today, but I did not. Then The Devil's Broker, about John Hawkwood, but also his era, his bloodthirsty era, and 2 Elizabeth Bowen novels to complement the collection of short stories of hers that I am currently absorbing. so there you go. That was a sort of a wallow in used books, kind of in memory of Harold Bloom. I was thinking about him the whole time that I was looking at all these things and knowing that he had read them all and would have opinions about all of them and would be willing to have those opinions challenged and might be interested in adding a book. God knows what's going to happen to his book collection. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now and find out what all the hubbub was out in the front of the house. So I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.